Do you feel powerful?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because I think I was changing a diaper when someone texted me that I was on your list.
I'm Susanna Hoban. I'm the editor and publisher of Chicago Magazine, and I'm here today with Laura Ricketts, who is on our list of the 50 most powerful women in Chicago. Laura, thank you for joining me for this call.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
I've asked you to think about an anecdote of how you found your power. You've been an activist on LGBTQ issues for probably more than a decade, at least as long as you've been one of the public faces of the Chicago Cubs. There must have been a moment that you decided that kind of catalyzed your interest.
There were a series of moments, really. I don't think of it necessarily as one particular moment, but a series of moments with regard to LGBT equality and activism. It was really hearing the idea about adding a constitutional amendment to our Constitution to define marriage as between a man and a woman. And it was at that point where I realized I need to get up, become more of an advocate for myself. I had to get active to try to do everything I can to prevent not only that, but to really empower the LGBT community to work towards equality.
Do you feel powerful?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because I think I was changing a diaper when someone texted me that I was on your list. And it is an interesting question, like what is power and what does that feel like? I think there's certainly been times when I've felt powerful, but the sense of power, feeling of power for myself hasn't been a constant. First of all, it's been a journey, like I said, of many experiences and what I've learned from those experiences and about myself and about life, about how I want to treat other people, how I want to walk in the world. But it certainly doesn't mean that I feel very powerful all of the time by any means. Especially children will humble you. And I certainly, with my 3-year-old son, don't feel very powerful most of the time. Of course, I'm kind of jesting. It's definitely not something that I feel consistently, and I walk around thinking I feel powerful.
Last year, I was in a community of media women that were identified as powerful in the media. And there were 25 of us, and someone asked the question, like, how many of you feel powerful? And only one of the 25 raised her hand, because I think that sometimes women have a hard time accepting the notion of being powerful. And that's why I was curious about it, because it's one of those things that I think is a little uncomfortable, but then also
Absolutely.
if you want to make a change, you have to kind of embrace your power.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. Women think of power as something they shouldn't aspire to. They think of power as something dirty or bad, or power used against people. And of course, women in our society and around the world power has been used in a bad way against them, to hold them down, to keep them from doing things. I like to think of power, at least my personal power, as something that is inherent in me and is inherent in everybody. And it's something that you need to tap into and to try to keep that in mind, that whenever you feel powerless, you are not, unless you allow yourself to be powerless. I co-founded a PAC. It's called LPAC. So many times when I would go to events for the LGBT community, political events or events for other kind of nonprofit advocacy, you'd be in a room and it would be 90% men. Men don't make up 90% of the LGBTQ community, right? So there was like this disconnect between women and political action. Myself and a number of other women got together to try to change that, to try to encourage women to think about power differently, and to think about their own power differently, and to understand that, at least politically, to engage politically, you don't need to have $1 million. You don't need to be able to make a huge contribution. If you contribute what you can collectively, you can have a very powerful voice. I am not a big lover of politics either, but if we don't play on that field, then we forfeit without even trying. And what's at stake is just too important. Our values, our rights, and our very lives are at stake.
With COVID going on right now, and obviously the Cubs should be playing now, but they're not. And you've been able to transition Wrigley Field into a satellite space for the Lakeview Pantry. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Obviously, since we're not playing baseball, as you mentioned, at least not yet, we kind of set to work at the Cubs and Cubs charities to see what we could do for our community in light of this pandemic, how we can help with response efforts. Of course, we've given to both the city and the state response funds and the city small business fund, which is very, very important. But we also wanted to find out what more we could do for our community. The Lakeview Pantry has been a partner probably nearly 30 years. A lot more people are in need of their services. I think they told me they've seen an increase of 140% in demand for their services. And they're servicing not just the Lakeview community, but other areas in the city like Pilsen and Humboldt Park and so forth. They've had to scale up their operation dramatically, and they needed space to be able to meet this demand and provide an additional distribution center, and also provide a safe distance for social distancing for all of their staff and all of their volunteers. So I was just thrilled that we were able to, provide that it worked out. I actually went down to volunteer last week for a few hours, and it felt so good just to roll up my sleeves and do something hands-on that you could feel was really a productive response to help all of us, deal with this crisis in our community.
Of all of the acts of charity, works of advocacy, things that you formed and started and contributed to, is there something that you're proudest of?
Without giving it too much thought, I would have to say winning marriage here in Illinois. A few years back, we had an effort to pass religious freedom and marriage equality bill down in Springfield. And we had all of the ducks in a row. We had all the right people engaged. We had done all of the lobbying. We were told that this would likely happen. And then on the day of the vote, of the proposed vote, it didn't happen. And I and everyone else who had been working on it, I think, felt so devastated. And so we had so much hope to finally have this happen. And we would rely on our elected officials to help us make that happen. And then it didn't happen. And we were all there to witness it. And it was just devastating and shocking. And I felt powerless. After a couple of days of moping around, I called up a good friend of mine who had been very involved. And I said, we have to do something. What are we going to do? How are we going to get this back on the floor in the fall? What came of that was the most remarkable collaboration of all these different players in this community, and national players as well, coming together to collaborate to achieve this goal, doing whatever they can to pitch in as a team to get this done. And we made it happen in the fall. And it was just such a quick turnaround in progress from that setback, and such a memorable lesson. Everyone's going to get knocked down from time to time. And what makes the difference in your life and in you is how you handle that. Give yourself a little time to lick your wounds, but then get right back up and get at it. Because ultimately, you write the book of your life, and you can choose. Are you going to be the victim, or are you going to be the hero? Because you're writing the story, and you have that power to do that. And that was one of the most shining examples of that lesson that I've had, and one of the most rewarding, because obviously a couple of years later, I was able to get married. And I had found the love of my life, and we're now it's like without a second thought, this is our life. But every day, or almost every day, I thank her for marrying me. And I just think, how blessed I am to have this home, this family, these children. But none of that would have been possible in the way that it has played out without going through that moment. Ultimately, that's where you find your power, is in those moments, at least to a large degree.
I think that was the perfect how I found my power anecdote right there. I was very moved by that story. So that was really nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you.